Lady Rosamund Vale removed her wedding ring before the Duke had taken his first sip of tea. The small sound it made against the porcelain saucer was not loud. It was only a pale gold circle touching china in the bright breakfast room of Caldermere House, yet every voice at the long mahogany table seemed to lose its place at once. Outside the tall windows, Mayfair shone under a careful morning sun, polished carriages rolling past as if London had no knowledge of private humiliations. Inside, silver lids gleamed over kidneys, toast, eggs, and marmalade. Footmen stood straight as carved posts along the wall. Guests unfolded newspapers with the practiced ease of people who believed discomfort should happen quietly, preferably to someone else. Rosamund had learned that lesson well. By the year 1858, in the third year of her marriage to Adrian Havelock, Duke of Caldermere, she had become an expert in vanishing while seated in full view. She wore dove-grey silk because Lady Octavia Sedgwick had once said pale colours made a duchess appear composed. She took weak tea because stronger tea invited comment. She spoke only when addressed, smiled only when required, and kept her left hand folded beneath the edge of the tablecloth whenever she could, as if even her wedding ring had become a witness she could no longer bear. Lady Octavia sat to Adrian's right, though Adrian had not yet arrived. That small theft of place had become ordinary. The widowed aunt by marriage was slender, white-haired, and beautifully preserved, with the smooth cruelty of a woman who never raised her voice, because servants, cousins, and timsigenstes had always leaned closer to hear her. "My dear Rosamund," Lady Octavia said, stirring sugar into her tea, though she never drank it sweet. "I do hope you slept. You looked quite pale yesterday when Mr. Mornay brought the Highmere accounts. A household of this consequence requires steadier nerves than most young ladies expect." The word young was not a kindness. Rosamund was 28, old enough to know that marriage did not always grant a woman authority, and young enough that society still found her failure interesting. Around the table sat Lord and Lady Wetherby, two Mrs. Farrow, Sir Edmund Pike, and Mrs. Alderley, a widow who gathered gossip as some women gathered lace. Rosamund felt their attention sharpen, then pretend not to sharpen. Her fingers rested upon the folded note hidden beside Adrian's place, beneath the shadow of his untouched plate. The paper had lain there since before the breakfast bell, placed by her own hand when the footman arranged the covers. No one had noticed. That was the one advantage of being invisible. "I slept sufficiently, Lady Octavia," Rosamund answered. Her voice was calm. She had spent years perfecting calm. "How fortunate," Lady Octavia said. "The Duke dislikes disorder before noon." A faint smile moved around the table. Not laughter. Laughter would have been vulgar. This was worse. This was agreement wrapped in manners. Rosamund lifted her cup, then set it down without drinking. At the far end of the room, the butler opened the door. His Grace, the Duke of Caldermere. Adrian entered, as though the house had been built to hold his silence. Tall, dark-haired, and precisely dressed, he carried the cold authority of an old title, and a man who had taught himself to need very little. His morning coat fit without a wrinkle. His expression offered no explanation for his lateness. His gaze moved over the guests, touched briefly on his aunt, and came at last to Rosamund. Not long enough, never long enough. "Forgive me," he said. "Estate letters detained me." "They often do," Rosamund said, before she could decide not to. A knife paused against toast. Adrian looked at her again, more carefully this time, as if her voice had crossed some invisible line in the carpet. Lady Octavia saved the room with a small laugh. "Her Grace has been much occupied with estate matters in your absence, Adrian. Perhaps too occupied. Highmere Court is a demanding responsibility for anyone not bred to the habits of command. Rosamund had been bred to duty. She had been bred to letters answered promptly, accounts read before signing, tenants remembered by name, servants corrected without humiliation, and silence borne with a straight back. What she had not been bred for was a household where every key passed through Lady Octavia's hand before it reached hers. Adrian took his seat. The footman poured coffee. Rosamund watched his hand close around the cup. Strong hands, restrained hands, hands that had never been cruel to her, that had almost made it worse. Cruelty one could name. Absence required a woman to doubt the shape of her own wound. I was under the impression, Adrian said, that Mr. Mornay's accounts were routine. As was I, Rosamund replied. Lady Octavia's spoon stopped moving. Until her grace found the figures tiring, she said. She has a delicate conscience. It is touching, but not always useful. A duchess must sometimes sign what wiser heads have already considered. And if a duchess has not considered it, Rosamund asked. The silence came down softly, like a curtain lowered by careful hands. Lady Weatherby's eyes widened by the smallest measure. Sir Edmund Pike looked into his coffee with sudden devotion. Adrian's face did not change, but his attention had sharpened. At last, Lady Octavia turned toward Rosamund with a patience that made the insult worse. Then she asks her husband's family for guidance, my dear. She does not distress herself with suspicions. No, Rosamund said. Of course not. The words were mild, her pulse was not. Beneath the table, she touched the ring. It had been her mother's first, reset for a ducal wedding that London had called fortunate. A Vale daughter marrying Caldermere had been spoken of as rescue, elevation, triumph. No one had asked what kind of loneliness might live inside a grand house with marble stairs and 27 bells. Adrian watched her hand emerge from beneath the tablecloth. The ring caught the morning light. For the first time in months, perhaps years, everyone looked at that small band of gold as if it were not decoration but evidence. Rosamund twisted it once. It resisted, as it always did in the morning when her fingers were cold. Then it came free. Lady Octavia inhaled, not loudly. Loudness would have admitted fear. Rosamund placed the ring upon the folded note beside Adrian's plate. The gold settled over the paper like a seal. Rosamund, Adrian said. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Not because he never used it, but because he had never used it with alarm. She rose. Her chair moved back only an inch, and a footman stepped forward at once, trained to rescue furniture from awkwardness, though not women from insult. Rosamund inclined her head to the table. Forgive me, I find I have no appetite. Lady Octavia's eyes had gone bright and hard. Sit down, Your Grace. This is unnecessary, Rosamund turned to her. The title, spoken by Octavia, had never sounded like honor. It had always sounded like a borrowed dress being inspected for stains. No, Rosamund said. It is the first necessary thing I have done in this room. Mrs. Alderley made a small sound behind her napkin. Adrian stood so quickly that his chair struck the carpet with a muffled thud. He did not move toward Rosamund. That restraint held her in place for one dangerous second. If he had commanded, she could have hated him. If he had pleaded, she might have broken. Instead, he looked from her bare hand to the ring, then to the folded note beneath it. What is that? He asked. Lady Octavia answered before Rosamund could. A theatrical gesture, nothing more. Her grace is overwrought. Rosamund looked at Adrian then, truly looked at him, at the man whose name had protected everyone in the house except his wife. Then let his grace decide what value remains in a duchess without obedience. Her voice did not tremble. She was grateful for that. She moved toward the door, each step measured, every gaze following her now that she had ceased trying to be unseen. The breakfast room seemed longer than it had ever been. Silver, silk, porcelain, newspapers, watching faces, all the beautiful instruments of a life that had taught her to bleed without leaving a mark. At the threshold, she paused only because Adrian spoke again. Rosamund. There was something in his voice she had never heard before. Not tenderness, not yet. Recognition, perhaps. The first startled recognition of a man discovering that a quiet room may contain a locked door, and behind it, years. She did not turn back. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said, and left him with the ring. In the hall, the air felt cooler. Her lady's maid, Clara, stood near the stairs with a shawl folded over one arm, eyes lowered but face pale with understanding. Rosamund walked past the portraits of dead Caldermere men who had all looked certain of their place in the world. Behind her, through the open door, no one spoke. Then came the soft scrape of porcelain. Adrian had lifted the ring. A pause followed. Rosamund stopped at the foot of the stairs, though she did not mean to. Paper unfolded. The house seemed to hold its breath. Adrian read the first line twice, because the words were too quiet to be dramatic and too precise to be dismissed. When obedience is required more than truth, the ring becomes a shackle. For one suspended moment, the breakfast room remained arranged around him in all its polished order. The silver coffee pot steamed. A knife rested halfway through a slice of toast. Lady Weatherby's gloved fingers held the edge of her napkin, as if linen could protect her from scandal. Adrian felt the ring inside his palm, warm now from Rosamund's hand and cold from his own. Beneath the first line, in smaller writing, she had copied another message. "Sign the Highmere disbursement approvals before Thursday, or London shall learn what sort of wife Caldermere purchased and what sort of Duchess must be managed for his sake." His eyes moved lower. There were references to repair receipts, steward warrants, and household entries he had never placed before her. There was one sentence underlined only once. "I have written to you 3 times. None of my letters have been answered." The room seemed to alter shape around him, not visibly. No wall shifted, no candle guttered. Yet the distance between his chair and the door, through which Rosamund had vanished, became unbearable. "Adrian," Lady Octavia said, her voice soft and expertly tired, "you must not give weight to a moment of feminine distress. Rosamund has always been sensitive to responsibility." Adrian did not look at her. "Who gave my wife those papers?" Mr. Mornay was not present. That was the first thing Adrian noticed with sudden, cutting clarity. The estate agent had been expected at breakfast to discuss Highmere Court, yet his chair near the lower end of the table was empty. Lady Octavia folded her hands. "Mr. Mornay brought the accounts yesterday, as he has done before. The Duchess found them overwhelming. I asked who gave them to her with a threat attached. Lord Weatherby shifted." The two Mrs. Farrows stared at their plates. Mrs. Alderley looked almost ill with pleasure. Lady Octavia let a small silence bloom, confident it would make Adrian aware of the guests. It had the opposite effect. He set the note upon the table beside the ring. "You will all forgive the abrupt end to breakfast," he said. "This is now a private household matter." No one moved for half a second. They were not accustomed to dismissal during a meal, especially from a duke whose cold manners had always made rudeness unnecessary. Then chairs scraped softly. Lady Weatherby rose first, murmuring that she quite understood. Her husband followed. Sir Edmund made a shallow bow. The Mrs. Farrow went pale with curiosity and disappointment. Mrs. Alderley lingered half a breath too long. Adrian looked at her. She left. Only Lady Octavia remained seated. The footmen stood frozen against the walls, trained not to hear, not to see, not to become human unless summoned. Adrian turned to the butler. "Mr. Bellamy, close the doors after our guests. Then send every footman who served this table to the servants' hall. No one is to repeat a word about her Grace's conduct, her health, or her ring." If any version of this breakfast reaches a drawing-room by luncheon, I shall know it began in my own house." The butler bowed, face drained of colour. "Yes, Your Grace. And the letter tray from this morning. Bring it to my study untouched." "Yes, Your Grace. The correspondence cabinet as well." At that, Lady Octavia's fingers tightened around her spoon. It was the smallest movement. Adrian saw it. He wondered how many small movements he had failed to see, because it had been more convenient not to look. The doors closed at last, leaving only his aunt, the long table, and the ring. "You are making a spectacle," Lady Octavia said. "No," Adrian answered. "I am discovering one," she sighed with the sorrowful patience of a woman correcting a boy. "Rosamund is ashamed of her own inadequacy. She has never taken naturally to the dignity required here. A duchess must be guided. She must not take offense at every necessary instruction." Adrian lifted the copied threat. "This is instruction? It is not my hand. I did not ask whether it was." Her eyes cooled. "Then ask what you mean." He did. "Have letters from my wife been kept from me?" The question landed with more force than anger. Lady Octavia looked toward the door, as if servants might rescue her by reappearing. "I have often sorted household correspondence when you were occupied. Your mother trusted me with Caldermere House. You trusted me after her. That is not an answer. It is the only answer suitable to an insult." Adrian stood. The chair behind him made no sound this time, because he moved it deliberately. He placed the ring in his waistcoat pocket, close enough that he could feel its hard edge against his ribs. "You will remain in the breakfast room until Mr. Bellamy returns. You will send no note. You will receive no visitor. You will not speak of her grace as overwrought, nervous, delicate, unfit, or any other word that makes cruelty sound like concern." Lady Octavia rose slowly. For the first time that morning, she looked her age, not frail, never that, but old enough to know when power had changed hands. "You would take her side against your own family." Adrian thought of Rosamund's face at the door, composed beyond endurance. He thought of 3 unanswered letters. He thought of his name at the bottom of instructions he had never given, hovering over his wife like a locked gate. "My wife is my family," he said. The words were simple. That made their lateness unforgivable. He left before Lady Octavia could answer. In the hall, the house had turned unnaturally silent. Servants vanished from corners. Doors seemed to close by themselves. Adrian crossed the marble floor with the note in his hand and the ring against his heart, feeling a strange and terrible pressure, not panic exactly, but first honest alarm he had allowed himself in years. He had commanded estates, settled disputes between tenants, silenced creditors, negotiated with men twice his age, and endured parliament speeches without moving a muscle. Yet he did not know what to say to his own wife when he found her at the foot of the stairs with her bonnet ribbons half-tied. Clara, her maid, stood beside her holding a shawl and a small reticule. A travelling cloak lay over one arm. Rosamund had not fled in haste. She had prepared. That wounded him more than tears would have done. She had known there would be a morning when she must leave, and she had planned for it quietly, as she had endured everything else. "You are going out," he said. It was a foolish sentence. Her bare left hand held one ribbon beneath her chin. "I am leaving the house." Clara lowered her gaze and stepped back, though not far enough to abandon her mistress. Adrian respected the girl for it. Where Rosamund's fingers worked at the ribbon once, twice, it would not knot. "Lady Verena Wycliffe has offered me rooms in Russell Square. For how long? Until I can breathe without asking permission." He closed his hand around the note. "Rosamund, I read it. I assumed you would. That was why I left it where your breakfast should have been." There was no sharpness in her tone. Sharpness would have been easier. This was exhaustion shaped into courtesy. Adrian took one step closer, then stopped when her shoulders stiffened. The threat mentions approvals for Highmere Court. It mentions letters. It says you wrote to me 3 times. I did. I received nothing, I know. Those 2 words held no surprise, only knowledge. Then, why did you not come to me directly? The question left his mouth and shamed him before it had fully settled between them. Rosamund looked at him then, not as a wife looks at a husband, but as a person looks across a locked door at the man who owned the key and never tried it. Because, Your Grace, I have been sitting across from you at breakfast for 3 years. His breath stopped. Somewhere above them, a clock ticked with unbearable neatness. Don't call me that, he said quietly. Not like that. A faint sadness touched her face. What else should I call a man who has made himself only a title to me? He had no answer ready. None that would not insult them both. She turned slightly toward Clara. My cloak, please. Adrian looked at the maid. Leave us for 1 minute. Clara hesitated. Rosamund did not correct her. That too told him something. His wife's maid trusted him less than she trusted the danger of disobedience. No, Adrian said more softly. Stay. Her Grace will not be made uncomfortable for my pride. Rosamund's eyes flickered. It was not forgiveness. It was the first sign that she had noticed the effort. He took the ring from his pocket and held it out on his open palm, not toward her finger, not as a demand, only as evidence returned to its rightful owner. This belongs to you. She looked at it for a long moment. Does it? The question cut cleanly. He lowered his hand. It should have. A silence passed between them, and in it, Adrian heard the whole house differently. Not as Caldermere property, not as the seat of a dukedom, as a place where his wife had measured every word, because no one had made truth safe. I will find who wrote that threat, he said. I will find where your letters went. I will not permit any person in this house to call you unstable to protect themselves. That is a beginning, Rosamund said. It is not an apology. No. His voice roughened despite his effort to keep it even. It is not large enough to be one. Her fingers finished the knot at her throat. This time they did not tremble. Then, let it remain a beginning. She moved toward the front door. He stepped aside before she had to ask. A footman opened the door to the bright Mayfair morning, and the ordinary noise of London. Entered the hall. Hooves, wheels, distant vendors, the life of a city that knew nothing of a duchess, leaving with her ring in her husband's hand. At the threshold, Rosamund paused. Do not let Lady Octavia speak for me again. Adrian met her eyes. She won't. The contraction sounded almost too human from him. Rosamund seemed to hear that as well. Then she descended the steps with Clara behind her, her back straight beneath the soft grey cloak. Adrian stood in the doorway until the carriage turned the corner. Only then did he look down. The ring remained in his palm. The note remained in his other hand. For the first time since his wedding day, Adrian Havelock understood that a vow could be broken without a single act of betrayal. It could be broken by locked letters, by empty chairs, by letting another voice fill the silence where a husband should have stood. He turned back into Caldermere House, and the servants nearest the hall lowered their eyes. Mr. Bellamy, he called. The butler appeared almost at once. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian folded Rosamund's note with care. Bring me the correspondence cabinet, the mourning tray, and every household ledger touched by Mr. Mornay in the past 6 months. He paused, feeling the ring press into his skin, and send word to my solicitor. No delay. The carriage did not feel like escape until Caldermere House disappeared behind the turn into a busier street. Rosamund sat with her hands folded in her lap, the left one bare and strangely light, as if the absence of gold had changed the weight of her entire body. Beside her, Clara held the shawl and reticule with both hands, pretending not to watch her mistress breathe. London passed outside in neat flashes. Black railings, pale stone fronts, shop boys carrying parcels, a flower girl lifting violets in the grey morning, a gentleman stepping around a puddle with the grave attention of a man avoiding scandal in his shoes. Rosamund had expected to feel shame. Instead, she felt space. It frightened her more than shame would have done. For 3 years, every room in Caldermere House had seemed to ask something of her. Smile more, speak less, sign here, sit there, do not distress his grace, do not contradict Lady Octavia, do not make your loneliness inconvenient. Now, as the carriage rolled toward Russell Square, no one was asking anything. That silence was not empty, it was hers. Clara finally spoke when they passed the British Museum and turned into a quieter row of respectable houses. Your Grace, are you certain Lady Verena expects us? She expects me whenever I remember. I am a person before I am a title, Rosamund said. The words surprised them both. Clara lowered her eyes, but the corner of her mouth moved. Then she's a wise lady. She is a dangerous one, Rosamund replied. That is often better. Lady Verena Whitcliffe's townhouse stood behind iron railings, neither grand enough to threaten Mayfair, nor modest enough to invite pity. It belonged to a widow who had outlived one foolish husband, 2 grasping brothers, and the expectation that she should become quiet afterward. A maid opened the door before the footman had finished knocking, as though the house had been listening. Lady Verena came into the hall in a gown of dark blue wool, her silver-streaked hair pinned without apology. She took in the cloak, the bonnet, the maid, the bare hand, and the absence of luggage. Ah, she said, so the morning has become honest. Rosamund nearly laughed. The sound did not come. Something in her chest tightened around it. Lady Verena crossed the hall and took both of Rosamund's hands, not ceremonially, not as a guest greeting a duchess, but as an older woman holding a younger one at the edge of collapse and refusing to let her fall for the amusement of society. Her thumb paused over the place where the ring had been. Did he see? He read the note. Good, that may not be good. My dear, a blind man opening his eyes will always be displeased by the light. That doesn't make darkness safer. Rosamund looked past her into the small drawing room, where the fire had already been lit, and a writing desk stood near the window. On it lay paper, ink, sealing wax, and a silver knife. Lady Verena had not asked whether Rosamund would need to write. She had known. The knowledge nearly undid her. I left him with the ring, Rosamund said. No, Lady Verena answered. You left him with a question. Men of power dislike those. It forces them to discover whether they have a conscience or merely a reputation. Clara was sent upstairs to prepare a chamber. Tea appeared, then toast cut into small squares, which Rosamund could not eat. She removed her gloves with careful fingers and sat at the desk. Lady Verena did not hover. She stood near the mantel, guarding the room with the calm ferocity of a woman who understood that privacy could be a form of mercy. Rosamund dipped the pen and began. She wrote the date first, then the address. Then, with a steadiness that felt borrowed from some stronger version of herself, she recorded each instance she could remember. The first altered menu book. The first letter that went unanswered. The first time Lady Octavia had told her that a duchess who questioned accounts looked vulgar, as if poverty clung to the act of arithmetic. The morning Mr. Silas Mornay arrived with repair receipts from Highmere Court and placed them before her with the smooth smile of a man who believed a woman's doubt could be managed by impatience. The threat copied into the breakfast note, the 3 letters sent to Adrian. None returned, none answered. At the end, Rosamund stopped. Her hand ached. A small drop of ink had marked the side of her finger. She stared at it, as if it were proof that some part of her had finally left a mark. "You need not write it all today," Lady Verena said. "Yes," Rosamund answered. "I do. Why?" Rosamund laid the pen down. "Because if I wait, I shall begin to soften it. I shall write that Lady Octavia meant well. I shall write that Adrian was busy. I shall write that Mr. Mornay was only impatient. I shall write myself out of my own life to make the facts more comfortable." Lady Verena's expression changed. It was not pity. Rosamund could have borne many things, but not pity. This was respect, and it entered the room so quietly that Rosamund almost did not recognize it. "Then write plainly," the older woman said. "Plain truth is the one language polite liars fear." Rosamund sanded the page, folded it and sealed it with plain wax because she had not brought her own seal. Lady Verena pressed her ring into the wax instead, an old Wycliffe crest worn thin by use. "I will keep this copy," she said. "Make another for yourself. If Adrian sends for me, he may call. He may request. He may beg. If he has sufficient imagination, he may not summon." Rosamund looked toward the window. A milk cart rattled past. Somewhere beyond the square, Caldermere House still stood, full of portraits, ledgers, and people who knew how to turn cruelty into concern. "He asked why I did not come to him directly," she said. Lady Verena's mouth tightened. That is the question men ask when they finally arrive at a locked door and find the person inside has stopped waiting. He regretted it as soon as he said it. Good. Let regret teach him manners. Rosamund should have smiled. Instead, she touched the pale mark on her finger where the ring had rested. The skin looked vulnerable, almost younger. "I do not want revenge. No, you want fairness. That is why revenge will be tempted to imitate it. What if fairness is impossible?" Lady Verena came to the desk and rested one hand beside the sealed statement. "Then you will at least refuse to help them call injustice peace." In Caldermere House, Adrian had not touched his coffee, his breakfast, or the chair behind his desk. He stood while Mr. Bellamy laid the morning letter tray upon the blotter. The butler's hands were steady, but his face had the rigid look of a man who understood that an old household arrangement had become dangerous by daylight. "Nothing has been removed, Your Grace," Bellamy said. "Since your instruction," Adrian heard the careful limit, "since your instruction." The butler's gaze lowered. "Lady Octavia has often inspected household correspondence when Your Grace was away from London." "Did she inspect the Duchess's letters?" "I could not say, Your Grace." "That was not the question," Bellamy swallowed. "Letters from Her Grace were sometimes placed upon Lady Octavia's salver if they concerned domestic matters. And letters addressed to me?" The room did not move. The fire settled once in the grate. "At times, Your Grace, Lady Octavia indicated that certain matters were too small to trouble you before dinner or before a journey." Adrian looked down at the tray, a stack of invitations. 2 tradesmen's notices, a note from his solicitor acknowledging receipt of last week's estate abstract. Nothing from Rosamund. Of course nothing. He had not created a house where her letters could reach him. He had created a house where others decided whether her voice was convenient. "Bring the correspondence cabinet," he said. Bellamy bowed and left. Within 10 minutes, 2 footmen carried in the narrow walnut cabinet that had stood for years outside Lady Octavia's morning room. Adrian had passed it 100 times without seeing it. That fact now seemed impossible to forgive. Bellamy unlocked it with the housekeeper's spare key after admitting Lady Octavia's private key could not be found. Inside were old calling cards, household notes, invitation drafts, and several bundles tied in faded ribbon. Adrian saw Rosamund's handwriting at once. He knew it. Worse, he knew it, which meant he had ignored enough of it to be guilty. He untied the first bundle, 3 letters, all addressed to him, all opened. The first was measured. The second shorter. The third contained only 4 lines. Your Grace, I have been asked again to approve expenditures I do not understand. I would rather be thought troublesome than dishonest. If I am wrong, tell me so yourself. If I am right, do not leave me alone in being right. Adrian read the lines until they blurred, though no tears came. He was not a man who wept easily. At that moment, he thought it might have been better if he were. Bellamy returned with the Highmere ledger and set it down. Adrian opened it because anger was safer than grief. The entries were neat. Too neat. Repairs to the west wing. Replacement stonework, new linen stores, roof work completed, payments authorized under the approval of Her Grace, the Duchess of Caldermere. At the bottom of the page sat Rosamund's signature. It looked like hers, almost. Adrian took one of her opened letters and placed it beside the ledger. The difference was small, but once seen it became glaring. The true Rosamund lifted the final D in Caldermere with a slight curve. The ledger did not. Adrian placed one hand flat on the desk. He did not strike it. He did not need noise to understand violence when it had been done with ink. Send for Mr. Mornay, he said, and Mr. Harcourt, my solicitor. Privately. Bellamy bowed. Adrian looked again at the forged name his wife had left his house because she had been made a stranger inside it. Now her name had been stolen too. He took the wedding ring from his pocket and set it beside the letters. Gold, paper, ink, small things, damning things. Then he closed the ledger with deliberate care, as if the room itself were listening. No one, he said, is to touch these papers except Mr. Harcourt or myself. Yes, Your Grace. When Bellamy withdrew, Adrian remained alone with the evidence. Outside the study windows, London went on under its pale afternoon light. Somewhere in Russell Square, Rosamund was beyond his command. For the first time, Adrian was grateful for that. A woman who could still walk away, could still choose whether to return. And if she ever did, it would not be because a duke had summoned her. It would be because a husband had finally become worthy of being heard. Mr. Silas Mornay arrived at Caldermere House with the expression of a man who had practiced innocence before a looking-glass. He was narrow, neat, and dressed in sober brown, with gloves folded in one hand and a leather case tucked beneath the other arm. Nothing about him announced panic. That made Adrian distrust him at once. A frightened liar often wasted himself on trembling. A careful liar arrived prepared, Mr. Harcourt, the Duke's solicitor, sat near the study window with Rosamund's 3 opened letters, the Highmere ledger, and a stack of repair receipts arranged in precise rows across the desk. Adrian remained standing. He had discovered that sitting gave men permission to think the matter could be discussed comfortably. Mr. Mornay, he said, you presented these accounts to Her Grace. Mornay bowed. As instructed, Your Grace. By whom? By the ordinary requirements of estate management. Adrian looked at him until the man's smile thinned. That is not a person. Lady Octavia has long assisted with domestic communication between London and Highmere Court. I understood Her Grace preferred such matters simplified. Did Her Grace tell you that? Mornay's eyes moved to the ledger, then back. Not in those words. Mr. Harcourt lifted one receipt. This payment for West Wing stonework is marked complete. The sum is substantial. The West Wing roof required attention after the winter damp, Mornay replied smoothly. Highmere is an old house. Old houses have expensive appetites. Adrian felt the first pulse of anger, cold and clean. Do not be charming about my wife's signature. The solicitor placed Rosamund's letter beside the approval page. The signature is similar, but not exact. Ladies alter their hands, Mornay said. Particularly when hurried. Was she hurried? Adrian asked. I was not present when every paper was signed. You just said you presented the accounts to her. Mornay's mouth closed. The study grew quiet. Outside the door, a footman passed and then quickly moved away. Adrian let the silence work. He had used silence for years as a shield. Now he used it as a blade, and he disliked how naturally it came to him. "Where is the original warrant for the West Wing repairs?" Mr. Harcourt asked. "At Highmere Court, I believe." "You believe? In the estate office? Most likely." "Most likely is not a location," Adrian said. Mornay inclined his head. "I will send for it at once." "No. My steward will send for it. You will not write to Highmere until I permit it." A faint colour rose along Mornay's cheekbones. It disappeared quickly, but not quickly enough. Adrian saw it, and with that small sign, a larger truth opened before him. Mornay had not expected to be forbidden correspondence. He had expected to control what arrived. Mr. Harcourt folded his spectacles and placed them on the desk. "Your Grace, I recommend securing all estate books currently in London." "Done," Adrian said. "And those at Highmere." Mornay bowed again, but this time his shoulders had lost some of their measured ease. "Of course, Your Grace." "I only hope Her Grace has not been distressed by a misunderstanding." "You will not speak of the Duchess's distress," Adrian said. "You will speak of receipts, dates, signatures, and money." Mornay went still. "As Your Grace wishes?" "No," Adrian said. "As the truth requires." By noon, Lady Octavia had begun her own campaign. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She sent calling cards. That was far more dangerous. The first went to Lady Wetherby, with a note expressing regret that Her Grace had been unequal to the strain of recent domestic obligations. The second went to Mrs. Alderley, who could be trusted to repeat concern as if it were news. The third was stopped at the door by Bellamy, who brought the salver to Adrian's study, with the look of a man delivering a snake in a silver dish. Adrian read the wording once and understood Octavia's method. Rosamund was not to be called disobedient. She was to be called fragile. Fragility was a prettier cage, and society admired pretty cages. "No more leave this house," Adrian said. Bellamy bowed. "Her ladyship said they were private notes. Her ladyship no longer decides what private damage may be done under my roof." The butler hesitated. "Yes, Your Grace?" Adrian looked up. "Say what you mean." Bellamy's face tightened. "The household has been accustomed to Lady Octavia's instructions for many years. Then the household will become accustomed to mine." The words were simple, but they did not satisfy him. Authority could stop a carriage, seal a cabinet, dismiss an agent. It could not undo 3 years of letting Rosamund sit alone while another woman trained everyone to look past her. He reached for the ring on his desk, then stopped before touching it. He had no right to make comfort of the object she had used to escape. In Russell Square, Rosamund learned of Lady Octavia's campaign before the second pot of tea had cooled. The visitor was Mrs. Alderley herself, wrapped in plum silk and concern. Lady Verena received her in the drawing-room, because refusing would have given gossip a sharper edge. Rosamund sat near the window, gloved hands folded, spine straight. She had chosen a dark green morning gown from Lady Verena's wardrobe, altered with pins by Clara. It did not fit perfectly. That pleased her. For once, she was not arranged to suit Caldermere House. "My dear Duchess," Mrs. Alderley said, leaning forward, "I came only because I felt such tenderness for you this morning. Such scenes are so easily misunderstood." Lady Verena poured tea. "Scenes usually are, when repeated by people who enjoyed them." Mrs. Alderley smiled without showing her teeth. "How droll you are, Lady Verena. But truly, Your Grace, a wife's little protest may become a public burden if carried too far. Men of rank are not like ordinary husbands. They must not be embarrassed into tenderness." Rosamund looked at her. She felt no heat in her face, no tremor in her hands. Something inside her had become very still, and stillness she discovered, could be a kind of strength. I did not remove my ring to embarrass the Duke. Of course not. I removed it because wearing a vow while being denied truth had become dishonest. Mrs. Alderley blinked. Lady Verena's teacup paused halfway to her mouth, but her eyes shone. That is a rather grave way to speak of a household disagreement, Mrs. Alderley said. Yes, Rosamund replied. It is. The widow waited for Rosamund to soften the answer. Rosamund did not. At last Mrs. Alderley set down her cup. Lady Octavia fears you may be unwell. Lady Octavia fears I may be believed. The room changed after that, not loudly. There was no dramatic gasp, no accusation flung across the carpet. Only a narrow-eyed adjustment in Mrs. Alderley's face. The moment when a woman who carried gossip realized she had been given a sentence too dangerous to repeat without consequence. She left within 5 minutes, full of promises to call again. Lady Verena watched the carriage depart. She will repeat every word. Good, Rosamund said. Then let her repeat mine as well as Octavia's. A servant entered soon after with a card upon a tray. Lady Verena read it, then looked at Rosamund over the top. The Duke of Caldermere requests permission to call. The word permission moved through Rosamund with more force than the title. She nodded once. He may be received. Adrian entered 10 minutes later, hat in hand, not as master of the house, not as a husband claiming rights, but as a guest admitted by grace. He bowed first to Lady Verena, then to Rosamund. The courtesy hurt because it was correct. It hurt more because it was late. Your Grace, Rosamund said. Lady Caldermere, he answered quietly. Not Rosamund. Not yet. He waited until Lady Verena chose a chair by the hearth, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to grant dignity. Then he sat only after Rosamund inclined her head. She noticed. She wished she had not. I stopped Lady Octavia's cards, he said. Some already left the house. One found its way to Mrs. Alderley. I am sorry, Rosamund studied him. For the card, or for the house that made it possible? Adrian's fingers closed once around his hat brim. For both. Though the second apology is larger than I yet know how to make. That answer unsettled her because it did not defend him. A defensive man could be resisted easily. A man trying to tell the truth required more care. He removed several folded papers from his coat. Mr. Mornay claimed the Highmere receipts were routine. Mr. Harcourt disagrees. Your signature appears on approvals for repairs that may not have been done. I did not sign them. I believe you. The words entered the room and stayed there. Rosamund turned her face slightly toward the window, because if she looked at him too quickly, he might see what it cost her to hear them. You did not believe me at breakfast, she said. At breakfast, I had not yet understood the shape of the wrong. That is not an excuse. No, she said. It isn't. He accepted the correction with a small nod. May I ask something without making it a summons? You may ask the threat in your note. You copied it, but did you keep the original? Rosamund rose and went to the writing desk. Lady Verena watched without comment. From the drawer, Rosamund took a folded scrap protected between 2 sheets of clean paper. She did not hand it to Adrian at once. It was pushed beneath my sitting room door 2 nights ago. Adrian's eyes darkened. By whom? I do not know. She gave him the paper. He read it, then looked up sharply. This is not Mornay's hand. No, Rosamund said. That is what I tried to tell you before I left. Whose? She walked to Lady Verena's side table and lifted one of Lady Octavia's old invitations. Sent weeks before for a dinner, Rosamund had never been allowed to arrange. She placed it beside the threat. Look at the capital C in Caldermere. The same flourish. The same little break before the downstroke. Adrian bent over the 2 papers. His face went utterly still. Rosamund had seen that stillness frighten other men. Now she saw it frighten him. Lady Octavia, he said. Rosamund folded her hands again, hiding the bare finger by habit, then forcing herself to reveal it. I do not know if she wrote it. But whoever did was not merely stealing money. Adrian looked at her. They were stealing your voice. Rosamund's throat tightened. For once, she did not correct him. Outside, the square remained quiet beneath the pale afternoon light. But inside the room, the first true line of the conspiracy had appeared, thin as ink and sharp enough to cut. Lady Octavia was waiting in the blue drawing-room when Adrian returned to Caldermere House, and the arrangement of the room told him she had chosen the battlefield before he entered it. She sat beneath his mother's portrait, gloved hands resting upon a closed fan, a silver tea service before her untouched. The curtains had been drawn back to admit the pale afternoon light, which gave her white hair a halo she did not deserve. For years, that room had belonged to her in all but name. She had received callers there, corrected menus there, approved seating plans there, and trained half of London to think of her as the woman who held Caldermere House together, while its Duchess remained quiet and its Duke remained busy. Adrian saw it now with a clarity that made the familiar furniture seem accusatory. "You sent cards," he said from the doorway. Lady Octavia lifted her gaze without rising. "I sent reassurances. There is a difference. You sent poison with a lace border." Her fan opened with a soft snap. "How dramatic marriage has made you." I had hoped Rosamund's talent for wounded gestures would not prove contagious. Adrian crossed the carpet, but did not sit. "You will not refer to my wife in that tone. Your wife left your house without your permission before guests and servants. Tone is a luxury she forfeited this morning. She left because she was threatened. She left because she was corrected." The answer came too quickly. There it was, the truth beneath the manners. Not concern, correction. Lady Octavia did not believe Rosamund had been harmed. She believed Rosamund had failed to accept her proper place. Adrian looked toward his mother's portrait. The late Duchess had been painted in pearl-grey satin, serene and distant, a woman he remembered more as a standard than a comfort. After her death, Lady Octavia had stepped into the empty space with admirable efficiency. That had been the word everyone used. Efficient. The household had run. Dinners had been hosted. Tenants' wives had received hampers at Christmas. Servants had known where to stand. Adrian had mistaken order for loyalty. "You managed this house after my mother died," he said. "I allowed that arrangement to continue too long." Lady Octavia's face barely changed, but her fingers pressed against the fan ribs. "Allowed? My dear boy, I saved this house from your indifference. You were in mourning, then in Parliament, then forever at Highmere or White's or buried under estate papers. Someone had to preserve Caldermere dignity. Preserve it from whom? From foolish servants, grasping tradesmen, ambitious cousins, and eventually from a duchess who did not understand the weight of what she had married. Rosamund understands weight. That may be why she stopped pretending it did not bruise. Lady Octavia stood at last. Her silk skirts made a dry whisper against the carpet. She is a Vale. Respectable, yes. Pretty enough in that pale, solemn way, but not born to command a house like this. She entered these rooms as if asking pardon from the chairs. A duchess who apologizes by existing invites management. Adrian felt the words land with an inward force. He remembered Rosamund in the first months of their marriage, standing at the breakfast table with a list of household changes in her hand, waiting for him to look up. He had been reading a letter from Derbyshire. Lady Octavia had said, "Later, my dear. His Grace is occupied." Rosamund had folded the list. He had not asked what was on it. Another memory came sharper. Rosamund in a cream gown before their first large dinner, Octavia adjusting the lace at her throat and saying that the Duchess's taste was sweet, if rather provincial. Rosamund had smiled. Adrian had thought the smile meant patience. Now he understood it had meant survival. You corrected her gowns, he said. I guided her presentation. You altered her menus. I prevented embarrassment. You intercepted her letters. Lady Octavia went still. The silence that followed was the first honest thing she had given him. I sorted what was suitable, she said. To whom? To you? To Caldermere? No, Adrian said. To yourself. Her chin lifted. You think this is about vanity. I think this is about power. Of course it is about power. The fan closed again slowly this time. A great house runs on power. A girl who blushes before a housekeeper does not command it. A wife who questions every receipt insults the men employed to manage her comfort. A duchess who asks to be loved before she obeys turns marriage into theatre. She never asked to be loved. His voice was quieter than he intended. She asked for fairness. Lady Octavia's smile returned, thin and polished. Fairness is a word used by those who do not yet understand rank. Rank does not excuse forgery. Her eyes flashed. Mind. Your accusation. I am minding it carefully. Adrian drew Octavia's old invitation from his coat and placed it upon the tea table, then laid beside it the threatening scrap Rosamund had preserved. The capital C appears in both hands. The break before the downstroke is identical. Lady Octavia did not look down. That refusal told him almost as much as confession would have. Many women were taught by the same writing masters. Perhaps your Duchess has learned that a bare finger buys more sympathy than an obedient one. Adrian stepped closer, not enough to threaten, only enough that she could no longer pretend. He was still the boy she had arranged into silence. You will surrender your private key to the correspondence cabinet. I have misplaced it. Then you will find it. And if I decline, then every cabinet in this house will be opened by the locksmith before nightfall, and every servant will know why. Color rose beneath her powder. It was not fear. It was fury at being seen by those she considered beneath notice. You would expose family disorder to servants. No. You did that when you used servants to hide my wife's letters. For a moment, Lady Octavia looked at him with something almost like grief, though it was grief for a throne, not a person. You will regret placing that woman above the house. Adrian picked up the two papers. Rosamund is the Duchess of this house. I regret that I ever allowed anyone to forget it. In Russell Square, Rosamund discovered that kindness could be dangerous because it made people want to tell the truth. The young maid's name was Nell, and she entered Lady Verena's sitting room, carrying a fresh letter tray with such tense care that the silver edge trembled against the cups. She was not Lady Verena's senior maid. That much was plain from the too large apron and the careful way she avoided every carpet fringe. When the tray tilted, one note slid toward the teapot. Rosamund reached first and caught it before the seal dampened. Nell turned white. I'm sorry, Your Grace. I didn't mean to be clumsy. You were not clumsy, Rosamund said, placing the note safely aside. The tray is too heavy for one hand, Mrs. Vale said I was to manage. Lady Verena glanced up from her chair. Mrs. Vale says many things before luncheon that wisdom would postpone. Nell's lips twitched, then tightened as if even a smile might be reported. Rosamund recognized that expression. It was the face of someone trained to make herself smaller than blame. Set it here, Rosamund said, and take a breath before you spill what remains. The girl obeyed. Her hands were reddened from soap and cold water, though the day was mild. When Clara entered to collect a shawl, Nell stepped back too sharply and knocked the corner of a book from the table. It fell closed upon the carpet. The sound was small. Nell flinched as though it had shouted. Rosamund bent and picked it up herself. No harm done. I can pay for it, ma'am. For a book falling on a carpet. At Caldermere House, Lady Octavia said breakages show character. The room changed. Lady Verena's knitting stilled. Clara looked toward Rosamund, and something passed between mistress and maid, a shared recognition too old for the morning. Rosamund kept her voice gentle. "Were you at Caldermere House before coming here?" Nell stared at the floor. "Only for 6 months, Your Grace. I was second still-room maid. My aunt knows Lady Verena's cook, so when there was no place for me there anymore, I came here." "No place?" The girl swallowed. "I was blamed for mislaying a letter tray. Her ladyship said I had a careless nature." Rosamund set the book down with care. "Which letter tray?" "The one outside Her Grace's sitting room. Her Grace." Rosamund felt the room narrow around the words. "My sitting room?" Nell nodded once. "It happened more than once. I was told not to speak of it." Lady Octavia said Her Grace wrote too many little notes and tired everyone with them. Clara made a quiet sound. Rosamund's hand closed over the chair back. She did not sit. If she sat, she might not rise again with composure. "Nell," she said, "did Lady Octavia take letters from that tray?" The maid's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Servants learned early that tears were useful only to those permitted to be comforted. "I saw her key, ma'am. A small brass one with a black ribbon. She kept it in her work basket. It opened the correspondence cabinet near her morning room. Once, when I brought lavender water, I saw letters with Your Grace's seal inside. I didn't read them." "I wouldn't. I believe you." Nell looked up then, startled by belief as if it were a language she had not expected from a duchess. Rosamund crossed to the writing desk and took a sheet of paper. "Would you be willing to write what you saw? Not for gossip. For truth." The girl hesitated. Lady Octavia said no one would take the word of a still-room maid against hers. Lady Verena rose and came to stand beside Rosamund. "Lady Octavia has always suffered from a poor imagination." Rosamund placed the pen near the paper but did not push it into Nell's hand. "You may choose." "I will not command you." Nell looked at the pen, then at Rosamund's bare hand. "She said you were weak," the girl whispered. Rosamund smiled faintly. It did not feel like happiness. It felt like an old chain loosening by a single link. She has mistaken quiet for weakness before. The girl took the pen. By the time Adrian's note arrived an hour later, Nell's statement lay drying on Lady Verena's desk beside Rosamund's own. The Duke's handwriting was controlled, but the pressure of the pen had cut slightly into the paper. "I mistook quiet for contentment. I will not do so again. May I call tomorrow with Mr. Harcourt's findings?" Rosamund read the line once, then again. Lady Verena watched her over the rim of her spectacles. "Well, it is not enough," Rosamund said. "No," the older woman's voice softened. "But it is not nothing." Rosamund folded the note and placed it beside Nell's statement. For the first time since breakfast, she did not touch the pale mark where her ring had been. She looked instead at the growing stack of truth on the desk. Small papers, small hands, small courage. Not enough yet to break Lady Octavia's smile. Enough perhaps to begin. By the hour, Lady Weatherbean Footman announced the Duchess of Caldermere. Rosamund had learned that a bare hand could speak louder than a diamond necklace. She entered the Weatherby dining room beside Lady Verena Wycliffe, wearing dark green silk borrowed and altered with such skill that only a woman searching for weakness would notice the sleeve was a fraction too long. London's finest rooms had always trained women to measure one another before the soup was served. This room was no different. Candlelight trembled over gilt mirrors, white flowers, crystal glasses, and faces arranged into expressions of harmless pleasure. Yet every gaze lowered, just once, to Rosamund's left hand. No ring. No visible claim, no obedient explanation. The silence that followed was brief enough to be denied and sharp enough to be remembered. Lady Weatherby recovered first. Your Grace, how delighted we are that you could join us. You are very kind, Rosamund said. Lady Verena's hand rested lightly at her elbow, not because Rosamund required support, but because even dignity deserved a witness. Across the room, Lady Octavia stood near the mantel in lavender silk, speaking to Mrs. Alderley, with the serene air of a woman who had never lost control of anything. Her eyes touched Rosamund's bare hand, then rose to her face. There was no surprise there, only calculation. Adrian stood near Lord Wetherby, grave in black evening dress, his expression still enough to discourage comment. When Rosamund entered, he did not rush toward her. He bowed deeply enough to honor her, not so deeply as to make society scent a performance. Lady Caldermere, the address moved through the room, not her Grace, not my wife. Lady Caldermere, spoken with the formality due to her station. Rosamund inclined her head. Your Grace. Something flickered in his eyes at the distance between them. He accepted it. That was new. Dinner was announced before any private word could pass, and almost at once Rosamund saw the trap. Lady Wetherby had not designed the seating herself. She was too anxious, too apologetic, and too busy not looking toward Lady Octavia. Rosamund's card had been placed 3 seats below, where her rank should have put her, between Sir Edmund Pike and Mr. Lionel Mornay, a pale young man with damp-looking hair, and the eager nervousness of someone carrying another person's errand. Adrian's card sat across the table, and far enough away that any conversation between husband and wife would have to cross 5 witnesses. Lady Verena looked at the arrangement, then at Rosamund. How imaginative, she murmured. Rosamund did not move toward her chair. She looked instead at Lady Wetherby, who had begun to colour. My lady, I believe there has been a small confusion. Lady Octavia stepped forward before their hostess could answer. My dear Rosamund, no one could wish to burden you with ceremony tonight. Lady Wetherby has kindly arranged a quieter place for you. A duchess is not quieted by moving her chair, Rosamund said. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Several heads turned. Adrian crossed the room then, not hurriedly, but with such controlled purpose that the footman holding the seating list stepped back. He took up Rosamund's card, looked at it, then placed it beside his own at the proper end of the table. There has indeed been a confusion, he said. Her Grace will sit according to her rank. Lady Wetherby gave a little breath of relief. Of course, how foolish of me. I do beg your pardon, Your Grace. Rosamund looked at the woman and saw fear, not malice. There is no offence taken. Lady Octavia's smile did not falter, but a small pulse moved at her temple. Adrian offered Rosamund his arm. He did not touch her hand. The restraint mattered more than any display could have done. May I? He asked. Rosamund placed her gloved fingers upon his sleeve. You may. That was all. Yet the room rearranged itself around those 2 words. At table, the first course moved with the strained elegance of a conversation, pretending not to limp. Lord Wetherby spoke of the weather in Derbyshire. Lady Verena answered that English weather had the virtue of changing when society refused to. Sir Edmund coughed into his napkin. Mrs. Alderley asked whether Rosamund found Russell Square agreeable. Very, Rosamund said. It allows a person to hear her own thoughts. How restful, Mrs. Alderley said. Though surely a wife's proper rest is in her husband's house. Adrian's hand stilled beside his glass. Rosamund felt the room waiting for him to rescue her. She did not want rescue, not from this. A wife's proper rest, she said, is wherever truth is not treated as a disturbance. Mrs. Alderley blinked. Lady Verena smiled into her wine. Adrian said nothing, but the silence he gave now was not absence, it was room. He was leaving her word space to stand. That, too, was new. The fish course had barely been cleared when Sir Edmund, emboldened by discomfort and claret, glanced at Rosamund's bare hand. I hope you will forgive an old man's curiosity, Your Grace, but have you misplaced something this evening? A lesser cruelty would have hidden itself better. This one leaned upon humour. Rosamund looked down at her hand as if noticing it with the rest of them. The pale mark remained where the ring had rested. It no longer ashamed her. "No, Sir Edmund," she said. "Some vows must be examined before they are worn." The table went still, not shocked into scandal, stilled into attention. Lady Octavia set down her fork. "A poetic answer," she said. "Though poetry is not always wise at dinner." "Neither is cruelty," Adrian said. It was the first time he had entered the exchange. His tone was mild enough for manners and cold enough for warning. Sir Edmund flushed. "I meant no offence." "Then you will be relieved," Rosamund said. "To learn none was useful." Lady Verena's eyes brightened with such wicked approval that Rosamund almost smiled. Across from them, Lionel Mornay shifted in his chair. His napkin had slipped from his knee to the floor, but he did not retrieve it. His attention was on Lady Octavia, who had lowered her gaze as if studying the arrangement of her plate. A footman passed with the next dish. In that narrow movement of bodies and candlelight, Rosamund saw Lady Octavia's right hand leave the table. A folded note passed from her fingers into Lionel Mornay's palm beneath the fall of the cloth. It took less than a second. It would have meant nothing to anyone not already watching for theft done politely. Rosamund did not turn her head. She lifted her glass and met Adrian's eyes over the rim. Then she glanced once toward Lionel's hand. Adrian followed the movement. His face did not change, but the room around him seemed suddenly less safe for liars. He leaned toward Lord Wetherby and said something quiet. A moment later, a footman took position near the door, through which Lionel would have to pass if he wished to leave. The conversation resumed, but differently now. Lady Wetherby asked Rosamund about Highmere Court, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps kindness. Rosamund answered with calm authority about winter repairs, tenant cottages, and the west wing that she had not yet been allowed to inspect. She did not accuse, she did not plead. She simply spoke as a duchess who knew the name of her own estate. Several faces changed as she spoke, not warmly. Society rarely warmed when it could first calculate. But the calculation had shifted. A woman described as unsteady did not usually know the pattern of roof work in Derbyshire, or the cost of replacing linen stores. A wife dismissed as theatrical did not speak of steward warrants with such measured clarity. Lady Octavia heard it as well. Her mouth softened into the expression she wore when preparing something sharper. "How admirable," she said. "One sees now how deeply her Grace has thrown herself into accounts. Perhaps too deeply. A delicate mind may mistake suspicion for diligence." Rosamund turned to her, "and a controlling one may mistake obedience for virtue." This time, no one pretended not to hear. Adrian looked at Rosamund with something that struck her harder than admiration. Recognition, not of her pain alone, but of the person who had been present beneath it. Lady Octavia's fan opened, then closed. "You are tired, my dear." "No," Rosamund said. "I was tired when I allowed you to answer for me." Lady Wetherby whispered for the next course. The dinner moved on because dinners always did, even when the world beneath the table had cracked. Near the end of the meal, Lionel Mornay excused himself too early. The footman at the door bowed and delayed him with a message from Lord Wetherby regarding Carriages. In that moment, Adrian rose with perfect courtesy. "Mr. Mornay, I believe you have something intended for my estate agent." Lionel's face lost colour. Lady Octavia's hand tightened around her fan until the ivory ribs creaked. Rosamund sat very still. The partial victory did not feel sweet. It felt dangerous. Yet when Adrian looked back at her, he did not look as a duke pleased with his own command. He looked as a man asking silently, whether he had stood beside her correctly. Rosamund gave the smallest nod. It was not forgiveness, it was not surrender. It was enough to carry them both into the next battle. By 9 o'clock the next morning, London had given Rosamund a lover. Not a name, that would have been too generous. A name could be denied, traced, questioned, or dragged into daylight. The gossip sheet offered something better for cruelty and worse for truth. An unnamed gentleman, a private correspondence, and a Duchess whose bare hand now seemed less like dignity and more like confession. Lady Verena found the sheet first and tried to fold it before Rosamund entered the breakfast room. But kindness was a poor hiding place for news. Rosamund saw the movement. She saw Clara's face near the sideboard. She saw the untouched toast, the coffee cooling in its pot, and the morning light falling over the printed words, as if even sunlight wished to read them. "Give it to me," she said. Lady Verena did not insult her by refusing. The paragraph was small, tucked beneath a longer item about a singer at the Italian opera, but it had been written with a knife dipped in honey. Society, it suggested, had been too quick to pity a certain noble lady whose recent gesture at a Mayfair breakfast might not have been a protest against domestic oppression after all. Perhaps a ring was removed, not because a vow had been wounded, but because another vow had been whispered elsewhere. A private letter, seen by more than one discreet eye, was said to have passed through a side entrance. Those who knew the house understood. Those who did not soon would. Rosamund read the paragraph once. Then she placed it flat upon the table. Her hand did not shake. That was something. "How efficient they are," she said. Lady Verena's mouth tightened. Efficient liars always print before breakfast. It gives decency less time to dress. Clara made a small sound, half anger and half fear. "No one will believe it, Your Grace." Rosamund looked at her, and the girl's certainty broke her heart more than doubt would have done. "Many will believe it, precisely because there is no name. A shadow can resemble any man society wishes to imagine." Before Lady Verena could answer, the knocker sounded below. The house paused. A visitor at such an hour was either intimate, desperate, or dangerous. The maid entered with a card upon a salver. Lady Verena read it and passed it to Rosamund. "The Duke of Caldermere." Beneath the card lay a folded paper sealed with plain red wax. Not his seal, not hers. "He brought that?" Rosamund asked. "His Grace requested that it be placed in your hand at once," the maid said. Lady Verena watched her carefully. "You need not receive him if you do not wish to." Rosamund opened the folded paper first. The room narrowed to ink. The letter was addressed to no one, signed by no one, and written in a hand that looked painfully close to her own. "My dear friend, I have done what I dared at breakfast. The ring is gone, but I remain watched. Do not come by the front door. The side entrance after dusk remains safest. If Caldermere suspects, I shall claim nerves." He always believes silence when it suits him. Her breath left her so quietly that only Clara moved toward her. Rosamund lifted one hand to stop the girl. The last line blurred, then sharpened again. "Burn this." Lady Verena reached for the back of a chair. "No," Rosamund said. "It is clever." The letter had taken her pain and taught it to betray her. Adrian entered a moment later, not with the cold command of a duke demanding explanation, but with the controlled stillness of a man holding fire in his hands. He bowed to Lady Verena, then to Rosamund. His face altered when he saw the letter open before her. "You have read it." "I have. It was delivered to Lord Wetherby's house late last night," he said. A kitchen porter's boy claims he saw a folded note pass through the side entrance during dinner. Lionel Mornay denies knowledge. The boy says he can describe the hand that gave it. "Mine?" Rosamund asked. The word was gentle, too gentle. Adrian's jaw tightened. A gloved woman's hand, pale glove. green sleep. Clara drew in a sharp breath. Rosamund looked down at the dark green gown she had worn the night before, the borrowed gown that had not quite fit at the sleeve. A detail noticed. A detail planted. How thorough, she said. Adrian took one step closer, then stopped as if remembering the distance she had earned. Rosamund, I know this is false. She looked at him then. Do you? His expression changed, not into doubt, but into pain at the question. Yes, Lady Verena stood. Then say what must be said carefully, Your Grace. This room has had enough of careless men. Adrian accepted the blow with a slight bow of his head. Mr. Harcourt is tracing the printer. I have sent for the porter's boy, and I have ordered Lionel Mornay kept within reach until I speak with him again. He looked back at Rosamund. Why did you not tell me there were more letters? Silence. It did not fall, it struck. Adrian understood almost at once. Rosamund saw the knowledge enter his face a heartbeat after the words left his mouth. He had not meant accusation, perhaps. He had meant fear, urgency, the panic of discovering that the battlefield was wider than he had seen. But the sentence had already done its work. It had crossed the room and placed her, for one instant, where Lady Octavia wanted her, explaining herself before a man who should have begun with belief. Rosamund folded the forged letter with exquisite care. Because, Your Grace, I did not know of this letter until this morning. Rosamund, he said quietly, that's not what I meant. Meaning often arrives too late to repair wording. I know, do you? The second question was sharper than the first. Clara lowered her gaze. Lady Verena did not. Adrian stood very still. Rosamund rose, the folded letter between her fingers. I will not plead innocence as if virtue were a debt I must pay again each morning. I did not write this. I did not pass notes through side entrances. I did not remove my ring for another man. If belief must wait until proof is convenient, then I shall find proof without asking anyone to lend me trust. Adrian's face had gone pale beneath its usual control. I believe you. You believe the evidence is leaning in my direction. No, his voice roughened. I believe you, I asked badly. I asked from fear. I asked like a man who has not yet learned how much harm one careless question can do. That answer might have softened another morning. Not this one. The gossip sheet lay on the table between them like a witness. The forged letter rested in her hand. A false boy waited somewhere to describe a sleeve. A woman who had eaten beside them the night before had planned all of it while smiling over soup. Rosamund turned to Lady Verena's writing desk. The invitations, she said. Lady Verena moved at once, opening the drawer where she had kept Lady Octavia's cards and notes. Rosamund spread 3 of them across the blotter, then placed the forged letter beside them. Adrian came no nearer until she said, Look, he obeyed, not commanded, obeyed. She pointed to the capital C in Caldermere, then to the loop in claim, then to the narrow space before the final downstroke of the letter R. Whoever forged this tried to copy my hand from a letter already intercepted, but habits remain. See here, the flourish is not mine. It is the same little break in Lady Octavia's dinner invitation. The same as the threat. Adrian bent over the papers. The room held its breath around him. When he looked up, the remorse in his face was no longer cold. It was human, and that made it harder to withstand. You should not have had to find this while defending yourself from me. No, Rosamund said. I shouldn't. He closed his eyes for half a second, as if the contraction had cut him more deeply than the accusation. Then he opened them and stepped back, giving her space, as though it were the only apology he had earned the right to offer. Tell me what you want done. Rosamund almost laughed at the impossibility of it. A week ago, everyone had told her what must be done. Sign this, sit there, rest quietly, trust wiser heads. Now the Duke of Caldermere stood in Lady Verena's breakfast room, and asked her to choose the next move. The choice steadied her. I want the boy found and protected from whoever paid him. I want Lionel Mornay watched. I want the printer traced without a whisper, reaching Lady Octavia first. And I want every sample of my handwriting removed from Caldermere House before it breeds another lie. Adrian nodded once. It will be done. No, she said. It will be done with me informed. A pause, then quietly. Yes, with you informed. Lady Verena smiled faintly behind them. Clara looked as if she might cry. Rosamund did not. She took up the forged letter and placed it beside the gossip sheet, then set Lady Octavia's invitation above both. 3 papers. 1 wound, 1 answer beginning to form. She thinks shame will make me smaller, Rosamund said. Adrian looked at her bare hand, then at her face. It won't. No, Rosamund answered. It will make me precise. Adrian returned to Russell Square before noon the next day, with no attempt to make apology look like triumph. That, more than the papers under his arm, made Rosamund uneasy. A proud man defending himself was simple to resist. A proud man learning where to stand was far more dangerous to a heart that had survived by expecting little. Lady Verena received him in the front drawing room, where the curtains had been opened to a mild grey morning, and the writing desk had become a battlefield of ink, cards, statements, copied hands, and the gossip sheet that had tried to turn Rosamund's dignity into guilt. Clara sat near the door with mending in her lap, present by Rosamund's choice and not dismissed by his. Adrian noticed, bowed to her with a grave courtesy that made the young maid nearly drop her needle, and then looked at Rosamund. His gaze went first to her face, not her bare hand. She saw the effort. She disliked how much it mattered. I came with what I promised, he said, and with what I owe. Rosamund stood beside the desk. Those may not be the same thing. They aren't. The contraction was quiet, and because of it, human. He placed the packet upon the desk, but did not untie it. The first thing I owe is an answer for yesterday, not for the forged letter. For my question. Lady Verena looked up sharply, perhaps surprised that he had begun in the right place. Rosamund kept her hands still. You have already said you asked badly. That was too small. Adrian's fingers rested on the string around the packet. I asked as though your truth needed to pass through my alarm before I could honor it. I asked like a husband who had been absent long enough to confuse fear with judgment. I do not ask you to forget it. Good, Rosamund said. I couldn't. Pain moved across his face, but he did not retreat into coldness. Then remember this with it. I was wrong before the question. I was wrong months before it. I let you become a guest in your own house because order was more convenient to me than attention. Lady Octavia did not take authority in a single morning. I left it lying where she could reach it. The room did not soften, it deepened. Rosamund felt Lady Verena's presence behind her, steady as a hand against the back. And now, she asked. Adrian untied the packet. Now I do not ask you to trust my word, I bring you the work. He spread the papers across the desk. Copies of the Highmere ledgers, receipts marked paid, notes from Mr. Harcourt. 3 of Rosamund's intercepted letters, copied and sealed. A list of servants who had handled the correspondence cabinet. A separate sheet bearing samples of Lady Octavia's invitation hand. Rosamund bent over them, and the scent of paper and sealing wax rose like a warning. He did not explain over her shoulder. He waited until she lifted the first receipt. The West Wing stonework, she said. Paid twice. Yes, and the linen stores. Charged to Highmere, but no delivery record has been found. The roof repairs, claimed complete in London. The steward at Highmere has sent only a brief reply, but he says the West Wing remains closed. Rosamund looked up. Closed? Under Lady Octavia's instruction, according to him. Lady Verena made a soft sound of contempt. A locked room is a confession with hinges. Adrian nodded once. There is more. Mr. Harcourt found the name of a woman who served as Lady Octavia's paid companion for nearly 4 years, Miss Elspeth Rowe. She left last autumn with a small pension no one can explain through family generosity. Rosamund touched the false letter from the day before. A companion would have had access to invitations, household notes, perhaps old letters. And time to learn a hand, Adrian said. Miss Harcourt believes she may have copied domestic notes when Lady Octavia's fingers became stiff. Bellamy remembers seeing her at the correspondence cabinet. Rosamund's pulse quickened. A paid companion. A woman invisible enough to notice everything and poor enough to be used. The idea did not absolve Octavia. It made the cruelty wider. Where is Miss Rowe now? Bath, perhaps, Mr. Harcourt is tracing her. But we do not need to wait for her to act. Act how? Adrian looked at the ledger. Not at her. Highmere Court must be inspected. Not by Mornay, not by Octavia's servant. By us, with Harcourt and my steward present. The word us landed carefully, almost offered and withdrawn in the same breath. Rosamund turned to the window. Outside, a delivery cart rattled past, wheels striking a loose stone. Russell Square had become a refuge, but a refuge could become another kind of room if she stayed, only because she feared the door. Highmere Court had been a name used to trap her on papers she had not signed. Perhaps it was time she saw what her stolen signature had purchased, or failed to purchase. You want me to travel with you, she said. I want you to decide whether you will. As your wife, as the Duchess of Caldermere. He paused, and as the injured party. She turned back. Not hidden, no. Not presented as fragile, no. Not hurried into forgiveness, because we sit in the same carriage for more than 100 miles. His expression changed at that. Not amusement exactly, but something warmer and sadder. I wouldn't dare. You have dared worse. I have. The admission was immediate. Rosamund looked down at the ledgers again, at the copied names, the forged approvals, the neat arithmetic of theft. For years, she had thought the worst thing stolen from her was tenderness. Now she saw how thoroughly practical cruelty could be. It had taken her letters, her authority, her handwriting, her reputation, and nearly her belief that truth could still be proven. I will go, she said. Adrian's eyes lifted. You are certain? No, certainty is a luxury I do not possess. But I will go. Thank you, do not thank me yet. She placed one finger upon the ledger page. I travel as Duchess. My maid comes. Lady Verena receives our route and expected stops, Mr. Harcourt follows with the papers. If anyone asks why I am going, the answer is that I am inspecting my estate. Adrian bowed his head. Agreed. If Lady Octavia sends word ahead, I am to know at once. Agreed. If we find fraud, you will not bury it to spare Caldermere embarrassment. He looked directly at her. I won't. The contraction held more force than a formal vow. Rosamund wanted to believe it. She hated that wanting. Then we leave tomorrow, she said. Today would be too much. I need to think. Of course. He began gathering the papers, but she stopped him with a hand over the nearest sheet. His gaze fell to her fingers, bare, still bare. Leave the copies, she said. The originals may remain with your solicitor, but I will not be informed by summary. No, he said, you won't. Lady Verena rose and crossed to the bell. Then I shall have luncheon brought. Nothing prepares a woman to face ancestral fraud like soup. Clara made a startled laugh and quickly covered it. Even Adrian almost smiled. Almost. The sound faded soon, but it left the room less airless than before. For a moment, Rosamund saw what marriage might have been if truth had been allowed to sit at the table from the beginning. Not easy, not soft, but possible. Adrian turned to leave, then paused at the door. Rosamund, she should have corrected him for using her name. She did not. Yes, I will not ask for the ring. Her breath caught, though he had not moved toward her. No, she said. You will not, but I have kept it safe. She looked at him then. The distance between them was no longer the length of a neglected marriage. It was the smaller, sharper distance between injury and the first careful act of repair. Safe is not the same as restored. I know. He bowed. Tomorrow then. After he left, Rosamund stood over the papers until the ink seemed to swim. Lady Verena came beside her without touching her. Well, he is learning. That is irritating of him. Yes, Rosamund said. Very. But when she picked up the forged approval and placed it beside her true letter, her hand was steady. By evening, her small trunk was packed. Clara had inspected every ribbon and glove, as if preparing for battle, and Lady Verena had written the route in her own hand. The next morning, Rosamund descended the steps of the Russell Square townhouse, dressed in deep blue travelling wool, her left hand bare, her head unbowed. Adrian waited beside the carriage. He did not offer command. He opened the door himself. Inside lay a lap rug, a writing board, and a sealed envelope marked copies for her Grace. Rosamund looked at him, then stepped into the carriage. As the wheels began to turn north toward Highmere Court, London fell behind them, but not the truth. The truth travelled with them in ink, in silence, and in the space Adrian left beside her, for whatever she chose to say next. Highmere Court appeared at the end of a long Derbyshire drive beneath a sky the colour of unpolished pewter, and Rosamund understood at once why a dishonest account might hide behind beauty. The house rose from the slope in pale stone and dark ivy, with 2 square towers, tall chimneys, and windows that caught the afternoon light like watchful eyes. It was grand enough to silence questions. That had always been the danger of grandeur. People saw columns and ancestral glass, and assumed order lived inside. Adrian sat across from her in the carriage, one hand resting near the leather packet of papers, the other still. He had spoken little during the final miles, but his silence no longer pressed upon her as it once had. It waited. That difference unsettled her more than coldness would have done. Clara rode in the second carriage with Rosamund's trunk, and Mr. Harcourt followed behind with the copied ledgers, receipts, and Nell's written statement, sealed in a dispatch case. As the carriage stopped before the entrance, the great doors opened. A line of servants stood in the hall, led by a thin grey-haired housekeeper with an anxious mouth and capable eyes. Mrs. Fenwick, Adrian said as Rosamund stepped down. Your Grace. The housekeeper curtsied to him first by habit, then turned to Rosamund and lowered herself more deeply. Your Grace. Welcome to Highmere Court. Rosamund heard the pause before welcome, not reluctance, fear. Thank you, Mrs. Fenwick, she said. I am glad to see the house at last. Something moved across the older woman's face. Shame, perhaps, or relief. Adrian saw it too. Her Grace will inspect the West Wing before dinner, he said, Mrs. Fenwick's eyes widened. The West Wing, Your Grace? Yes, Rosamund answered before Adrian could. I understand it has been repaired. The housekeeper looked toward the steward, a broad man named Mr. Valeford, who stood near the lower stair with a ring of keys. He did not meet her eyes. It has been closed for some time, he said, on Lady Octavia's instruction. Adrian's voice cooled. Lady Octavia is not mistress of Highmere Court. The words passed through the hall like a draught under a door. Several servants lowered their gaze. Rosamund removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger, and gave them to Clara, who had just entered behind her. Her left hand remained bare in the light of the hall. Then let the proper mistress of the house begin with the locked wing. No one argued after that. The west corridor smelled of dust, beeswax, and old damp hidden under lavender. Valeford walked ahead with the keys, and Mrs. Fenwick followed, hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles whitened. Adrian kept beside Rosamund, but did not take her arm. Mr. Harcourt came behind, already making notes. The further they went, the less polished the house became. The carpets thinned. The air cooled. A narrow window showed a line of bare trees, bending in the wind beyond the terrace. At last, they reached a pair of double doors crossed by a heavy chain. The sight of it struck Rosamund with a strange calm. There it was, the room that had eaten money on paper and remained untouched in stone. "Open it," she said. Mr. Valeford fumbled with the keys. The lock resisted, then yielded with a dry click. When the doors moved inward, the smell of rot and cold plaster rolled into the corridor. No one spoke. The west wing was not repaired. It was wounded. Sheets hung over furniture, grey with dust. A patch of ceiling near the far wall had darkened from old rain. Several floorboards had warped. A stack of crates stood near the entrance, their labels still clean enough to read. Linen stores, curtain fabric, brass, fittings, guest chamber china. Rosamund walked to the nearest crate and lifted the edge of the packing straw. Inside lay untouched bolts of damask, dry and folded, never hung. "These were charged as delivered and installed, Mr." Harcourt said quietly, checking a receipt. 6 months ago." Adrian stood very still. "Mr. Valeford." The steward cleared his throat. "Your Grace, Mr. Mornay handled the London accounts. We received instruction that the wing was to remain closed until Lady Octavia approved the final arrangements." "And you accepted that?" Adrian asked. Her ladyship's letters bore the Caldermere seal. Rosamund turned from the crate. "Did any bear mine?" Mr. Valeford looked at her then, truly looked. "Some, Your Grace. Show me." They moved to a small estate office off the corridor, where the air was warmer but no less tense. Mr. Valeford unlocked a drawer and withdrew a bundle of instructions. The top sheet authorized storage purchases under Rosamund's name. The signature lay at the bottom, graceful and false. Rosamund placed her true letter beside it, the one Adrian had brought from London. The difference was small. The lie was not. "I did not sign this," she said. "Mrs." Fenwick made a faint sound behind her. Rosamund turned. "Mrs. Fenwick." The housekeeper pressed one hand to her apron. "I wanted to write, Your Grace." "To whom?" "To you, then to His Grace." But letters from the estate were to go through Mr. Mornay or Lady Octavia's London direction. "We were told Her Grace found estate matters distressing." Rosamund felt the old phrase settle at her feet like a discarded chain. Distressing, overwhelming, delicate. All the pretty words used to keep her from the truth. "Did you believe that?" The housekeeper's eyes filled, though she did not weep. "At first, perhaps. Then I found your notes returned unopened in a packet from London. Not returned to you. Sent here by mistake, I think. I kept them." Adrian's face changed. "Where?" Mrs. Fenwick hesitated. Rosamund did not command. "Please," she said. That word undid what rank could not. The housekeeper went to a narrow cupboard and removed a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She placed it on the desk before Rosamund, as if offering back something stolen from a grave. The string had been tied twice. Rosamund recognized her own seal on the broken folds within. 3 letters. The first she had written after Mr. Mornay pressed the repair approvals upon her. The second after Lady Octavia insisted the west wing was complete, though Rosamund had never seen it. The third she remembered too well, because she had written it past midnight, when the whole of Caldermere House seemed to sleep, except the part of her that still hoped. Adrian reached for it, then stopped. "May I?" The question came low. Rosamund nodded. He opened the letter with care. His eyes moved down the page. She knew the line before he spoke it, because it had lived inside her since the night she wrote it. "I do not require affection," he read, his voice nearly unsteady, "only fairness." The words entered the shabby little office and stripped it of every pretense. Mr. Harcourt lowered his gaze. Clara looked away. Mrs. Fenwick covered her mouth with her hand. Adrian did not move. For a moment, he seemed less like the Duke of Caldermere than a man brought at last before a door he should have opened years before. "I wrote that when I still thought fairness was a small request," Rosamund said. He looked up. "It was not small. I made it unreachable." She should have felt triumph. She felt only the ache of being proven right too late. "Not unreachable," she said. "Intercepted." The distinction mattered. She would not let his guilt swallow the crime of others. Adrian understood. She saw it in the way he straightened, not away from remorse but through it. "Mr. Valeford," he said, "Mr. Mornay's authority over Highmere is suspended from this hour. No accounts leave this estate except through Mr. Harcourt or Her Grace." The steward bowed, flushed and shaken. "Yes, Your Grace." Rosamund turned to Mrs. Fenwick. "No servant will be dismissed for obeying instructions given under false authority. But from this day, letters addressed to me come to me unopened." The housekeeper curtsied, and this time the gesture was not fear. "Yes, Your Grace." Adrian looked at Rosamund then. Something passed between them across the desk, over the forged signature, the true letter, and the returned words neither of them could unread. It was not forgiveness. It was recognition of a shared duty, beginning where neglect had ended. A footman appeared at the office door, breathless from restraint rather than speed. "Your Grace." A messenger from London. Adrian took the sealed note. The colour left his face as he read. "Lady Octavia has called a gathering at Caldermere House," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon. She means to settle your conduct before witnesses." Rosamund folded her old letter and placed it beside the false approval. Her hand was steady now. "Then we shall bring her something worth witnessing." Adrian wanted to leave for London within the hour, and that was how Rosamund knew he had not yet understood the shape of the victory they needed. He stood in the estate office at Highmere Court, with the London messenger's note in one hand, and the proof of fraud spread before him, in ink seals, copied signatures, and opened letters. The wind pressed at the narrow window, as if the house itself had begun to listen. Mr. Harcourt was already sorting the evidence into neat packets. Mrs. Fenwick had withdrawn to prepare a list of servants who could speak to the intercepted correspondence. Mr. Valeford had gone pale with the effort of remembering every instruction that had passed through Mr. Mornay's hands. Adrian looked like a man who had found a fire in his own house and meant to stamp it out before anyone asked who had left the lamp unattended. "We return at once," he said. "Octavia intends to gather witnesses. She shall have them. Harcourt will present the ledgers. I will confront Mornay. By tomorrow afternoon this ends." Rosamund folded the letter she had written months ago, the one that asked only for fairness, and set it upon the desk. No, the word was quiet. It stopped him more effectively than anger. Adrian turned. "No? Not like that." His jaw tightened, though not with impatience toward her. She had begun to know the difference. "Rosamund, she is moving now because she knows the ground is failing under her. If we delay, she will print another lie by morning. Then let her lie. A lie told too quickly often leaves its hem caught in the door." Mr. Harcourt looked up, then wisely looked down again. Adrian stepped closer to the desk, careful not to crowd her. "You are being accused before London. I will not permit her to continue. You will not permit it." Rosamund repeated the words gently, and saw at once that he heard the fault in them. "That sounds very noble. It also sounds as if I am to be carried into your drawing room like a damaged object and set before society, while you break my enemies for me. That is not what I intend. Intentions have been very busy lately explaining harm after it is done." The sentence reached him. His shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in restraint. "Tell me what I am missing." No command. No cold correction. The question gave her enough room to answer. You are thinking like a duke whose household has been insulted. I need you to think like a husband whose wife was not only insulted, but silenced with his inconvenience. Adrian did not speak. Behind him the ledgers lay open to a forged signature. Rosamund looked at her name there, graceful and false. It had been easier for someone to copy her hand than to hear her voice. If you go to London, only to crush Lady Octavia and Mr. Mornay, society will understand one thing, she continued, that the Duke of Caldermere was deceived and has corrected the embarrassment. They will pity me, perhaps. They may even apologize to me. But they will not know how the deception was allowed to live so comfortably under your roof. Adrian's face had gone still. She saw the cost before he paid it. You want me to say it. I want to know whether you will defend me if the evidence embarrasses you too. Mr. Harcourt's pen stopped moving. Even the wind seemed to pause against the window. Adrian looked at her as if the question had taken him not by surprise, but by shame. Yes, he said, too quickly. Rosamund shook her head. Do not answer as a gentleman. Answer as the man who will have to stand in his own drawing-room before titled witnesses and admit that his wife wrote to him 3 times, and he never knew because he had made absence a habit. Answer as the Duke who must say that Lady Octavia's power grew in the space he left empty. Answer as the husband who must let society see that the Duchess was not difficult, not nervous, not ungrateful. She was unheard. Adrian closed his eyes, only for a breath. When he opened them, the coldness had gone from his expression, and what remained was harder to look at. I will say it, not for effect. No, not to make yourself appear repentant. No, not because public humility may win me back. His mouth tightened at that, but he did not flinch away. No, because it is true. Rosamund's fingers pressed against the edge of the desk. Truth. The word had been so misused in Caldermere House that she almost distrusted it from habit. Yet here it stood, plain and unadorned, between them. Adrian turned to Mr. Harcourt. Write it into the order of presentation. I will speak before the ledgers are shown in full. Mr. Harcourt inclined his head. Yes, Your Grace. No, Rosamund said. Both men looked at her. She lifted the threatening note, the one that had begun with obedience and ended with shame. This first. Let them hear what was used against me before you explain what you failed to see. The wound before the apology. Adrian nodded once. As Her Grace wishes. Her Grace. Not a courtesy tossed over injury, but authority recognized. Rosamund gathered the papers into 3 groups with steady hands. 1 for the breakfast note and original threat. 1 for the forged signatures and receipts. 1 for the intercepted letters and servant statements. Adrian watched her arrange them, and something in his face changed again. Not admiration alone. Relief, perhaps, that she was still capable of command after so many people had called her delicate. Mrs. Fenwick's testimony must be protected, she said, and Nell's. Lady Octavia will call them disloyal if she cannot call them liars. They will be protected, Adrian said. Mornay, he will be present, Mr. Harcourt said. A message can be sent requiring his attendance under pretense of final clarification. If warned too sharply, he may disappear. Then do not warn him sharply, Rosamund said. Let him think he still has time to bow. For the first time that day, Adrian almost smiled. It vanished quickly, but not before she saw the warmth behind it. That warmth was dangerous. Not because it asked too much, but because it asked nothing. After the papers were sealed and the servants summoned one by one to confirm dates, Rosamund asked to see the chapel. Adrian took her himself through a side passage that smelled faintly of old stone and winter roses dried in bowls. Clara followed at a proper distance, close enough for propriety, far enough for privacy of feeling. The chapel at Highmere Court was small compared with the house, no more than 30 feet long, with plain pews, a narrow aisle, and coloured glass that laid fragments of blue and red across the floor. It had not been built to impress guests. It had been built for vows whispered when no one important was watching. Rosamund stood near the first pew and looked toward the altar. "Was this where your parents married?" "No, London." Adrian stopped beside her, leaving space between them. "My mother preferred witnesses. My father preferred obedience." The chapel was used more for tenants at Christmas than for family tenderness. How sad. Yes, the admission was soft. She looked at him then. "Do not become gentle only because you are guilty. I am trying not to become anything for display." "And what are you trying to become?" Adrian's gaze dropped to her bare hand, then returned to her face. "A man you do not have to survive." The words entered her with such quiet force that she looked away. They were not a declaration. They were not enough to heal anything by themselves. But they were the nearest thing to love he had dared speak, and the restraint of it made her throat tighten. He seemed to understand the danger of having said even that much. "Forgive me," he said. "I shouldn't ask tenderness from you in a chapel when I have not yet earned trust in a drawing room." She breathed once, carefully. "No, you should not." "Then I will wait." "For forgiveness? For whatever you choose." Even if it is only peace without me, that answer hurt differently. It did not trap her. It opened a door she had not known she was allowed to use. Rosamund reached into the small reticule Clara had given her and drew out a plain velvet case. Adrian recognized it before she opened the lid. His face altered. Inside lay the wedding ring, returned to her that morning by Mr. Harcourt after Adrian placed it in the solicitor's custody for the journey. She had not worn it. She had carried it. That distinction mattered. "I am taking this to London," she said. Not as a promise, Adrian's voice was low. As evidence, as a witness. He looked at the gold circle resting against the dark velvet. "Then let it witness the truth before it witnesses anything else." Rosamund closed the case. The click sounded small in the chapel, but final. Outside, evening gathered over Highmere Court. By morning, they would return to London with ledgers, letters, servants' statements, and the note that had once lain beneath a ring at breakfast. Rosamund walked back through the dim passage with Adrian beside her and Clara behind, and for the first time since leaving Caldermere House, she did not feel she was being followed by shame. She was being accompanied by truth. That was different. That was enough for the journey ahead. By the time Rosamund entered Caldermere House, the following afternoon, the drawing room had already been arranged to condemn her. Lady Octavia had chosen the gold room, not the blue one, because it held more witnesses comfortably, and because its mirrors multiplied every expression. The curtains were open to a colourless London sky. A fire burned too brightly for the mild day. Chairs had been placed in a crescent around the tea table, as if the guests had come for music rather than judgment. Lady Weatherby sat stiffly near the hearth, her husband beside her. Mrs. Alderley occupied a chair with an excellent view of everyone's face. Sir Edmund Pike stood by the mantel, pretending to admire the clock. Two older ladies of rank whispered behind painted fans, and Lord Bexham, a cousin of Lady Octavia's late husband, looked solemn in the way men looked when they hoped scandal would entertain them, without requiring courage. Lady Octavia stood at the centre of it all in violet silk, her white hair arranged beneath a lace cap, her face composed into sorrow. She had made herself the injured guardian of Caldermere dignity. That might have frightened Rosamund once. Today she saw only the performance. Adrian stood near the door when she arrived, Mr. Harcourt slightly behind him, with a dispatch case, and Bellamy at attention farther back. Rosamund wore deep blue wool, the same travelling gown she had worn from Highmere, brushed clean but not made festive, Clara had arranged her hair simply. Her left hand remained bare. In her right she carried the small velvet case. Adrian bowed to her first, before any guest could decide how much respect she deserved. Lady Caldermere. The room felt the address. Rosamund inclined her head. Your Grace. Lady Octavia's eyes moved at once to the bare hand, then to the velvet case. My dear Rosamund, she said, with enough tenderness to spoil tea, we were concerned that you might be too fatigued to attend. How fortunate, Rosamund answered. That concern has never been able to decide my strength. Mrs. Alderley's fan paused. Lady Verena Wycliffe, who had entered behind Rosamund, without announcement loud enough to flatter her, smiled faintly and took a chair near the window. Lady Octavia's gaze sharpened. She had not invited Lady Verena. That was why Rosamund had. Adrian crossed the room and offered Rosamund the chair at his right. Not behind him, not apart, beside him. She accepted it. The velvet case she placed upon the tea table, unopened, where every eye could see it. A small object, a dangerous one. Lady Octavia looked away first. We are gathered, she began, with reluctance and affection, to prevent further injury to the Caldermere name. No one here wishes to humiliate her Grace. Lady Verena coughed softly. A gathering called for that purpose has taken a curious route. Lady Octavia ignored her. Recent conduct has been troubling. The removal of a wedding ring before guests. A departure from her husband's house, improper public statements. And now, most painful of all, a letter suggesting correspondence with a gentleman whose identity her Grace has not explained. Adrian's face remained still. Rosamund knew now that stillness did not always mean absence. Sometimes it meant a man had chosen the exact moment to strike. Lady Octavia took a folded sheet from her reticule. I have no wish to read this aloud. Then don't, Adrian said. The room shifted. Lady Octavia blinked. I beg your pardon. You said you had no wish. I accept your restraint. Colour rose, faint but visible, beneath her powder. Adrian, this is not the time for cold humour. I am not amused. He turned to Lord Wetherby. You received that letter through your house last night? Lord Wetherby cleared his throat. A porter's boy delivered it, yes, to my butler. The boy claimed it had come from a side entrance during dinner. Did you see the hand that gave it? No. Did your butler? No. Adrian looked at Lady Octavia. Yet the gossip sheet printed the suggestion before most households had finished breakfast. Mrs. Alderley lowered her fan an inch. Lady Octavia's expression held. London prints quickly when a matter is already being discussed. By whom? Adrian asked. Concerned friends. Name one. Silence. It stretched long enough for the clock on the mantel to become audible. Lady Octavia gave a small, wounded laugh. You would have me betray private callers? I would have you stop hiding accusation. Inside concern. Rosamund felt the old room turn toward him, expecting the Duke's anger to finish what her evidence had begun. She did not let it. She lifted one hand. Adrian stopped at once. The obedience was so subtle that most of the room missed it. Lady Octavia did not. Her eyes narrowed. Rosamund took from her reticule the copied threat, the old invitation, and the forged letter. She laid them in a row upon the tea table, beside the velvet case. Lady Octavia, before anyone discusses my supposed conduct, I would ask for the courtesy of a simple comparison. I am not a clerk, Lady Octavia said. No, Rosamund replied. You have always had others do clerkly things for you. A thin breath moved through the room. Rosamund placed the invitation nearest Mrs. Alderley, who leaned forward despite herself. This invitation was written in your hand, naturally. This threatening note was pushed beneath my sitting-room door 2 nights before I removed my ring. Lady Octavia's mouth hardened. You say so? Yes, I do. Rosamund set the forged love letter between them. This letter imitates my hand, but it carries certain habits not mine. the capital C, the break before the downward stroke. The same narrow lift appears in your invitation. Many hands resemble one another. Then you will not object to writing one phrase for us. Lady Octavia's fan closed. This is absurd. Adrian spoke quietly. Write the phrase, Octavia. I will not submit to a parlor trick arranged by a wife who has already made a spectacle of this house. Rosamund leaned back. The phrase is simple. Caldermere requires obedience. Lady Verina's eyes gleamed, but she said nothing. Mr. Harcourt opened his dispatch case and removed a clean sheet, an inkstand, and a pen. He placed them on a small writing table near Lady Octavia's chair. No one moved. Lady Octavia looked at the paper as if it had insulted her breeding. I refuse. It was not a confession. It did not need to be. The room heard it. Mrs. Alderley looked from the invitation to the threat. Lord Wetherby shifted forward. Sir Edmund's face had lost its idle curiosity. Adrian turned to Bellamy. Ask Mr. Mornay to join us. The door opened before Bellamy could leave. Silas Mornay stood there, hat in hand, pale from waiting in the hall longer than dignity allowed. Behind him, the younger Lionel Mornay hovered, like a man who had hoped to be forgotten by architecture. Mr. Harcourt's clerk stood at the corridor entrance. A quiet trap had closed around them all. Your Grace, Mornay said, I was told final clarification was required. It is, Adrian answered. You will remain. Mornay's glance went to the table, then to Lady Octavia, then to the door behind him. He calculated badly and too late. Perhaps this is a family matter. You made it an estate matter, Rosamund said. His eyes jerked to her. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed to understand that the woman whose signature he had used was present, not represented. Present, Mr. Harcourt removed the Highmere receipts from his case and placed them near the papers already on the tea table. We shall come to those shortly. Lionel took one small step backward. Bellamy appeared behind him, not touching, not threatening, merely there, a wall in black livery. Lady Octavia rose. This has gone far enough. Adrian looked at her. No. It has only just reached the people who should have heard it at breakfast. The word struck the room. Breakfast, ring, note. Every witness seemed to remember the story as London had told it, then wonder what had been omitted. Rosamund opened the velvet case. The wedding ring lay inside, gold against dark velvet, silent and terrible in its simplicity. She did not touch it. Instead, she drew out the folded note that had lain beneath it that morning and smoothed it upon the table. Her voice remained calm, though she could feel her heart beating with every eye upon her. Lady Octavia, she said, since you have called witnesses for my conduct, let us begin with the sentence that made my conduct necessary. She lifted the note and held it toward the woman who had once ruled every chair in the room. Read it aloud. Lady Octavia did not take the note. For the first time since Rosamund had known her, she allowed a refusal to look like fear. The hand in its violet glove remained fixed upon the carved arm of her chair, and the lace at her throat rose and fell once with a breath too shallow for dignity. I will not be commanded by a girl who mistakes hysteria for courage, she said. Rosamund lowered the paper only slightly. Then I shall read it myself. She turned, not to Adrian, not to Lady Verina, but to the room that had come prepared to judge her. Her voice was clear enough to reach the mirrors and return unchanged. When obedience is required more than truth, the ring becomes a shackle. No one moved. The sentence that had once been folded beneath gold now stood bare before them all. Rosamund placed the breakfast note on the tea table and lifted the original threat, preserved between two clean sheets. This was pushed beneath my sitting-room door before I removed my ring it. Reads, sign the Highmere disbursement approvals before Thursday, or London shall learn what sort of wife Caldermere purchased, And what sort of Duchess must be managed for his sake? Lady Weatherby pressed a hand to her lips. Sir Edmund stared at the carpet as if the pattern had become suddenly accusing. Lady Octavia gave a small laugh, brittle and controlled. Anyone might have written that. Anyone might have invented it. Indeed, Rosamund said. That is why I did not bring only my injury. Mr. Harcourt stepped forward and opened his dispatch case. The Highmere accounts, Your Grace? Adrian nodded. Proceed. The solicitor laid out the receipts with the careful quiet of a man setting stones upon a grave. These documents record payments for West Wing stonework, roof repair, linen stores, curtain fittings, and guest chamber china. The records bear the supposed approval of Her Grace, the Duchess of Caldermere. He placed Rosamund's true letter beside them. The signatures do not match. The difference is slight but consistent. Lady Octavia's mouth thinned. Clerks have made fortunes from calling women's handwriting inconsistent. Clerks have also saved estates from thieves, Lady Verena said. Mr. Harcourt continued without smiling. The West Wing was inspected yesterday by His Grace, Her Grace, the estate steward, the housekeeper, and myself. It has not been repaired. The crates charged as installed were found unopened. The roof damage remains visible. The funds are missing from their stated use. Silas Mornay made a faint movement toward the door. Bellamy, standing behind him, did not touch him. He merely stepped into the path. That was enough. Adrian looked at the agent. You will stay. Mornay's face had gone grey. Your Grace, discrepancies of estate accounting can occur without dishonesty. Country repairs are complicated. Instructions travel through many hands. Then your memory shall have company, Adrian said. Mrs. Fenwick. The door opened and the Highmere housekeeper entered with Clara beside her and young Nell behind them. Mrs. Fenwick looked frightened, but she came forward and curtsied first to Rosamund. That gesture moved through the room more powerfully than any accusation. Your Grace, she said. Rosamund answered softly. Thank you, Mrs. Fenwick. The housekeeper faced the others. Letters from Her Grace to His Grace were returned to Highmere in a packet from London. I kept them because I feared they had been mislaid on purpose. The West Wing was kept closed under Lady Octavia's instruction. We were told Her Grace found estate matters distressing. Nell stepped forward next, small and pale in her plain gown. Lady Octavia's eyes sharpened. That girl was dismissed for carelessness. Nell flinched, but Rosamund turned toward her. You may speak if you choose. You owe no one your fear. The girl steadied. I saw Lady Octavia's brass key, ma'am. It opened the correspondence cabinet near her morning room. I saw letters with Her Grace's seal inside. I didn't read them. I only saw the seal. A still-room maid's imagination, Lady Octavia said. No, Adrian answered. A still-room maid's courage. The words shifted something in the room. Nell's eyes filled, but she did not lower her head. Mr. Harcourt placed the intercepted letters on the table. 3 letters addressed to His Grace. All opened. All withheld. Adrian reached for the 3rd and unfolded it. He did not read all of it. He read only the line that had already changed him. I do not require affection, only fairness. The silence afterward was not polite. It was ashamed. Rosamund felt it settle upon the guests, upon the gilded chairs, upon the mirrors that had been chosen to multiply her disgrace and, now multiplied, Lady Octavia's exposure instead. Adrian turned to the room. His face was pale, but his voice did not fail. Those words were written by my wife to me. They did not reach me because others intercepted them. But they were able to be intercepted because I had made distance a habit. I permitted Lady Octavia to rule the domestic life of this house while I mistook order for peace. I let my wife's quiet become convenient. That failure is mine. Rosamund did not look away. He had done it, not perfectly, not with poetry, with truth. Lady Octavia stood so quickly that her chair struck the carpet behind her. You would disgrace your own blood before servants and strangers for a woman who abandoned your table. Adrian faced her fully. My wife did not abandon my table. She exposed what had been placed upon it. I preserved Caldermere. You preserved your power. Her face hardened. The mask cracked, and beneath it lay not sorrow, but fury. She would have ruined everything with questions. Mornay understood what must be protected. Money can be restored. Authority cannot. A house like this cannot be surrendered to a timid girl with ink on her fingers and scruples where obedience should be. Mornay whispered, Lady Octavia. It was the whisper of a man hearing the carriage leave without him. She turned on him too late. Adrian's gaze moved to the agent. Speak carefully. Your position and your liberty may depend upon whether you choose truth before Mr. Harcourt chooses process. Mornay's composure collapsed into a bow that was almost a plea. Her ladyship said the funds would be covered before the autumn rents were settled. I was in debt. She promised protection. The Duchess had questioned the receipts. Her signature was needed only to quiet the matter until arrangements could be made. And the forged letter? Rosamund asked. Her voice was not loud, yet Mornay looked at her as if she had struck the center of the room. I did not write that, Your Grace. I carried one note to Lionel, only one. Her ladyship said it would make society look away from the accounts. Lionel Mornay covered his face with one hand. Lady Octavia did not deny it. Her silence after so many days of elegant words was the plainest confession she had given. Adrian turned to Bellamy. Lady Octavia's rooms will be prepared for departure before nightfall. She will no longer reside under my roof or speak in the name of Caldermere House. No invitation, subscription, charitable list, household instruction, or estate communication shall bear my authority. Through her hand again, Lady Octavia swayed, not from weakness, but from the shock of losing an empire built from chairs, keys, and whispers. You cannot cast me out like a servant. No, Adrian said. A servant who did this under pressure might deserve mercy. You had rank, shelter, and trust. You used all three as weapons. He turned to Mornay. Mr. Harcourt will take charge of the records. You are dismissed from every Caldermere appointment. Any question of fraud will proceed through proper legal channels. Mornay bowed, broken by the word proper more than by anger. The room had ceased to be Octavia's stage. It had become Rosamund's witness. Lady Weatherby rose first and curtsied to her, low enough that no one could pretend it was mere courtesy. Your Grace, I am ashamed that I lent my room to doubt, Lord Weatherby followed. Sir Edmund bowed without his earlier humour. Mrs. Alderley looked as if she wished to vanish into her fan. Rosamund accepted their gestures, but she did not feed on them. Public vindication was necessary. It was not the same as healing. Adrian took the velvet case from the table and opened it. The wedding ring lay there, unchanged by everything it had survived. He held the case toward her, not high, not dramatically, only with both hands and no claim in his posture. You do not need to wear this for me to believe you, he said. You do not need it to be Duchess here. You do not need it to make any person in this room understand your worth. If it returns to your hand, it will be because you choose it, not because I ask in public. Rosamund looked at the ring, then at him. Every witness waited. Once their waiting would have forced her into obedience. Not now. She closed the case gently. Justice is not the same as trust, she said. Adrian bowed his head. No. I will return to Highmere. Court, as you wish. Not to hide. No, to see whether what was broken in this marriage can be repaired without pretending it was never broken. His voice lowered. I will come only if you permit it. The room heard that too. A duke asking permission from the wife he had once failed to hear. Rosamund picked up the breakfast note and folded it along the old crease. "Then come to Highmere," she said. "But leave command in London." Adrian looked at her with a grief so honest it no longer asked to be forgiven. "I will." She turned then and walked from the gold drawing-room with Lady Verena at her side, Clara behind her, and every gaze following the woman they had expected to see humbled. The velvet case remained in her hand. The ring remained unworn, yet for the first time since the breakfast when she removed it, Rosamund did not feel bare. She felt seen. 3 weeks after the gold drawing-room fell silent, the breakfast room at Highmere Court opened to a morning that asked nothing of Rosamund, except that she sit where she chose. That was the first difference. The second was the stack of letters laid beside her plate, unopened and addressed in several hands, each one delivered by Mrs. Fenwick herself, with the grave pride of a woman correcting a household's history by inches. The third difference was Adrian. He entered at 8 o'clock, not late, not with a sheaf of estate papers to hide behind, not with the cold abstraction of a man already elsewhere. He paused at the threshold until Rosamund looked up. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." No title stood between the words. No audience waited to interpret them. Outside the tall windows, Derbyshire lay under a pale wash of autumn light, the lawns silvered with dew, and the trees beyond the terrace turning bronze at the edges. Inside, the sideboard held coffee, tea, toast, eggs, and preserves, but no one had arranged the table to make a point. Rosamund sat at the head, where Mrs. Fenwick had placed her after the first morning back, and no one had moved the chair since. Adrian took the seat to her right because she had once said he might. He never assumed it. That, too, had become part of the new order of the house. The west wing no longer wore chains across its doors. Workmen had begun repairs under honest estimates, approved by Rosamund, Adrian, Mr. Harcourt, and the estate steward, who now signed nothing without 2 witnesses and a clear conscience. The unopened crates had been inventoried. The missing funds were being pursued through proper channels. Mr. Mornay had vanished from Caldermere service as thoroughly as if his name had been sanded from the ledgers, though Mr. Harcourt's letters suggested he had not escaped consequence. Lady Octavia had gone to a cousin's house in Bath, deprived of Caldermere carriages, Caldermere invitations, and the authority she had worn for years like mourning jewellery. London, Rosamund knew, had changed its voice. It had not changed its nature. There were notes of apology now from women who had watched her bare hand at dinner, invitations written with sudden warmth and carefully phrased regrets from those who had once found her silence convenient. Rosamund read them all. She answered only some. Forgiveness, she had discovered, did not require an immediate reply by post. Adrian placed a small folded note beside her cup. He had done this every morning since returning to Highmere. The first had contained only the repair schedule for the west wing, because he had understood that usefulness was safer than tenderness. The second had contained a question about whether she preferred the tenant cottages, inspected before or after Michaelmas accounts. The third had thanked her for correcting an error he had missed. By the 10th day, the notes had changed, not softened exactly, deepened. This morning, Rosamund opened the paper and read, "I have asked Mrs. Fenwick to send the west wing keys to you, not to me. A house should not forget its mistress twice." She lowered the note slowly. "You did not need to write this." "No," Adrian said, "but I needed to do it." She looked at him over the rim of her teacup. He had changed less visibly than the house. The same dark hair, the same controlled posture, the same profile that could make servants, straighten and gentlemen, choose their words. Yet he had begun doing small things that required no witness and therefore could not be mistaken for display. He walked the repair passages with her and listened when she spoke. He asked Clara directly whether Rosamund's carriage rug was warm enough for estate drives, then accepted Clara's answer, without looking amused that a maid had an opinion. He sent letters to Russell Square, so Lady Verena would know Rosamund was not being swallowed back into a ducal house. He never mentioned the wedding ring. The velvet case remained in the upper drawer of Rosamund's writing desk, beside the folded breakfast note and the original threat. She had placed them there herself. Not hidden, not displayed. Preserved. Mrs. Fenwick tells me the west guest chamber may be safe to enter by Friday, Rosamund said. She tells you before she tells me, as she should. That does not wound your dignity? Adrian lifted his coffee. My dignity has survived worse than proper household management. Rosamund almost smiled. He saw it. He did not reach for it too quickly. That restraint had become his most persuasive apology. The door opened, and Mrs. Fenwick entered with the morning tray. A letter from Lady Verena Wycliffe, Your Grace, and one from Mr. Harcourt. She placed both beside Rosamund's plate, not Adrian's. Rosamund broke Lady Verena's seal first. The letter was brisk, affectionate, and gloriously unrepentant. London is now pretending it always admired you. Do not reward it too generously. Make the Duke work in fresh air. It improves men who have spent too long inside their own consequence. Rosamund laughed. The sound surprised her. It surprised Adrian too. Not because he had never heard her laugh, but because this one had no apology attached. Lady Verena? He asked. She advises fresh air for your character. Then I am in grave debt to Derbyshire. You may begin repaying it after breakfast. He set down his cup. Where would you like to go? Once that question would have sounded ornamental. Now he meant it. Rosamund looked toward the terrace where the morning had brightened, and the path beyond the lawns led toward the west wing, the tenant road, the chapel, and the small rise where the whole estate could be seen at once. The west wing first, she said. Then the cottages near the lower meadow. A practical route. I am a practical woman. I know that now. The answer held no flattery. Only regret, respect, and something quieter that had not yet demanded a name. Rosamund folded Lady Verena's letter and placed it aside. Then she opened the drawer built into the small breakfast writing table near her chair. Adrian saw the movement and went still. She took out the velvet case. The room did not change as the gold drawing room had changed. There were no titled witnesses, no fans stopping mid-air, no servants pretending not to breathe. Mrs. Fenwick had already gone. Clara was upstairs. Outside, a gardener crossed the lawn with a basket of cut stems. The world did not lean closer. That was why the moment could be honest. Rosamund set the case between them. I have been thinking, she said. Adrian did not look at the case for long. He looked at her. About the ring? About what it meant when I wore it before. He waited. The old Adrian would have filled the space with certainty. This one had learned the cost of doing so. I wore it because it had been placed on my hand in a church, Rosamund said. Then because society expected it. Then because removing it would have admitted something was wrong. By the end I wore it, because I had not yet found the courage to stop lying politely. Adrian's hand closed once on the edge of the table, then relaxed. I made that lie easier than truth. Yes, the single word did not break him. It steadied them both. But truth has consequences too, she continued. It does not mend everything simply because it is spoken aloud. I know. Do you? I am learning. She opened the case. The ring lay inside as it always had. A small circle of gold, no larger than before, and yet no longer capable of pretending to be simple. Adrian took a breath, then pushed the case gently back toward her, as if even its nearness to his hand might become pressure. Not as a shackle, he said, not as proof. only if it's still a vow you wish to choose." The words were almost the ones he had promised, without speaking in London, but here they were different, softer because no one needed them to be grand. Rosamund touched the ring. It was cool at first, then warm beneath her finger. "If I wear it, it does not mean I have forgotten. I would not want you to. It does not mean I will be quiet too. Keep peace, then peace will have to become worthy of your voice." Her throat tightened. She looked down before he could see too much, then decided hiding was an old habit that deserved no more loyalty. She lifted the ring and slid it onto her own finger. It resisted for the briefest moment as it had that morning in Mayfair. Then it settled, not as it had before, not heavier, not lighter, chosen. Adrian did not touch her hand. Not until she turned it palm upward on the table between them. Then he placed his hand beside hers, not over it, close enough that warmth moved through the narrow space between their fingers. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me for choosing what you must keep earning." A quiet breath left him, almost a laugh and almost pain. "I won't." She looked at him then, and at last the smile came fully. That was almost wise. Lady Verena would be astonished. Lady Verena would say not to encourage you. She would be right. The morning widened around them. After breakfast, they would inspect damp plaster, question estimates, read tenants' petitions, and answer letters. Nothing was magically repaired because a ring had returned to a hand. That, Rosamund thought, was why she trusted it more. At the writing table, the old breakfast note remained folded in the drawer. Not destroyed, not worshipped, simply kept. It was proof of a morning when she had chosen herself before she chose him again. Rosamund rose and offered Adrian the west wing keys. He took them, then placed them back in her palm. "Lead the way," he said. She did.